Today on Passion for Food, we're going to be making this easy cake pan flan, also known as creme caramel, which sounds fancy, but it's surprisingly easy to make. But whatever you call it, it's totally eggcellent. So let's go ahead and execute the plan and make this cake pan flan, man. And all we're going to need for this is one of these standard 8-inch non-stick cake pans. Just about everybody has one of these, and one of these 8-inch baking dishes. Just about any baking dish will work, but you see how these fit together perfectly, and there's that little gap at the bottom there? That's actually really going to help us for that water bath we're going to use for our custard later. And now it's time to put the caramel in the creme caramel. We are just going to make a real simple caramel here. I'm going to be using half a cup of sugar, but you can vary the amount of sugar depending on how much caramel sauce you want. This recipe is going to make approximately 4 good-sized servings, so I feel like half a cup is perfect. And we don't technically need the water at all here, but it does make things a lot easier, so I like to add about a 1/4 cup just to get things started. At which point we just want to bring it up to a boil on high and then move it down to about medium high and just let it simmer. We don't need to be stirring, shaking, or otherwise messing with it. Just think about it like an angry badger. Just leave it alone. You'll know all the water is gone when you start to get bigger bubbles and the bubbles start to kind of pile up on each other. And that's definitely when you want to start paying attention. That color will start changing to a golden brown. At which point we just want to give it a quick shake to eliminate any potential hot spots. And you're going to see little wisps of smoke, and you can actually smell it. That's how you know you're done. We'll go ahead and pull this off. And we do want to get that into our cake pan immediately because it's going to start hardening just as soon as it cools. And we just want to give that a quick swirl to get all the caramel nicely distributed. Careful here, this will give you a sick burn and not the funny kind. Fun fact, the name flan actually comes from an old French word flan, which comes from an old Latin word fladon, which is actually derived from a high old German word flado, which means flat cake or object. I thought there might be a joke in there somewhere, but it really did fall flat. Anyway, it's time to put the creme in the creme caramel, so we are going to make what is a pretty traditional custard recipe. Try not to get eggshells in there the way I did. It's really not all it's cracked up to be. We're going to be using 4 eggs today, but the cool thing about this custard recipe is it scales up and down very easily. Each egg constitutes 1 serving, so per egg you also want 2 tablespoons of sugar and a half a cup of milk. So here in total we need half a cup of sugar for our 4 eggs, along with about a teaspoon of vanilla. I just like to eyeball that. And here's a little trick to getting this perfect every time. We're actually going to cream together the eggs and sugar before we add our milk. The reason being, for the perfect custard, we want the eggs really broken down and totally smooth, but we don't want a lot of air and bubbles whipped into the final mix. If you're going to be using a food processor or blender, you can just throw everything in there and blend. That does it quick enough and without working in too much air. But if you're going to be using any sort of whisk, electric or otherwise, I definitely suggest you whisk the eggs and sugar together first. This back and forth motion I'm doing creates the greatest amount of shearing force, so it's the most efficient way to get that all creamed together. So let's go ahead and get our milk in here. We know we need half a cup per egg, so that's 2 cups for the 4 eggs. And unlike before when we were really beating the heck out of those eggs, we want to be more gentle with this. And now you hear that sound? That's undissolved sugar scraping along the bottom of the bowl. Our goal here is just to gently stir this until we get that sugar dissolved. You'll be able to feel with the whisk when that happens. Everything is nice and smooth and dissolved for us. So let's go ahead and get this flan into our cake pan. And you'll see the reason we do the caramel first is that we actually want this to have cooled down a little. You can see it's like glass here. We don't want it to be too lava hot or it can actually sear the eggs as we're pouring them in, and that's no good, so don't do that. Even cool as it is, you can hear it cracking as I pour in those eggs. And just to make transportation easier and prevent us sloshing boiling water all over the place, we're going to put our baking dish in the oven first. At which point we're going to fill this about 2/3 of the way up with boiling water. And yes, it does have to be boiling water. Don't use cold water for this. And we just want to slide this back to about the center of the oven. And we're just going to very gently place in our flan. Depending on your oven setup, it can actually be easier to put the pan with the caramel in the baking dish first and then actually pour the custard mixture into there, but just use your best judgment on that. And we want to bake this at 325 for 55 to 60 minutes. At which point we want to just give it a quick poke to be sure. Insert a toothpick right into the middle and it should come out a little wet but without any clumps of custard sticking to it. That way we know it's ready. So let's go ahead and pull that out. Careful, don't burn yourself. And as much as we'll wish we could have some immediately, we do need to let this cool completely. In fact, for optimal results, we want to do a 2-step cooling process. Let it cool to room temperature, and then we're going to cover it with some plastic wrap. It's fine if the plastic wrap is in direct contact with the custard. That'll peel off just fine. And then we're going to stash this in the fridge for at least 2 hours. The reason being that caramel on the bottom is actually still dissolving, so if you try and serve it too soon, you're still going to wind up with some hard caramel on the bottom of the pan that was supposed to be caramel sauce. In any event, to actually serve this, I like using a large plate, or in this case, I'm using a cake stand. And just to ensure everything goes smoothly when we do our flip, I do like going around the outside with a knife like this. This part probably isn't necessary because we're using the non-stick pan, but it makes me feel better, so I'm going to keep on doing it anyway. So let's go ahead and get this inverted, and hey, don't flip out, folks. I hear these have a really high turnover rate. So let's go ahead and do the big reveal, and you can see this came out just beautifully. And like I was saying, this recipe easily scales up or down depending on what type of container you'd like to use, but I really do feel like the cake pans work great for this. And I'll be honest, normally when I make this, rather than cutting it into individual servings, I'll just put this on the table and hand out spoons. If anyone is squeamish about that, hey, that's just more flan for me, man. This custard is just so silky smooth, and with that caramel sauce, well, I guess we could say it's really flantastic. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Passion for Food. If you have, please give me a thumbs up below and consider subscribing and hitting that little bell so you don't miss our future episodes. I promise they will be exciting. This has been Graham with Passion for Food.